and this is really important, if Joe Biden wins this election, it doesn't mean that like we've turned the page to a new America. It doesn't mean that you can, as a civic matter or a political matter, ignore the fact that millions and millions and millions of people are going to vote for Donald Trump in 2020. And they need to have a place in this country. We need to be really clear about what we reject and what sort of sentiments we say we don't want to be embraced in public life. But the people are there. And so anyone suggesting that they're going to lead the country has to lead the whole country.
Hello, dear friends and damn givers. Welcome to the Let's Give a Damn podcast. I'm your host, Nick Lapara, and this is the show where I sit down for meaningful conversations with people who aim to build fewer walls, longer bridges, and bigger tables with their lives and work. I truly hope today's conversation gives you hope and pushes you to give more dams than ever before. My guest today is my friend and fellow dam giver, Michael Ware. Michael has a lifelong commitment to addressing civil rights and poverty issues. He believes politics is a forum for loving your neighbor. Let me repeat that for you. Michael Ware believes politics is a forum for loving your neighbor. And that's exactly why he is on the show today, to help convince us that politics isn't something we should shy away from and that we should instead be leaning into more and more. Michael is a leading strategist, speaker, and practitioner at the intersection of faith, politics, and public life. And he advised the president. You heard that right. Ever heard of a guy by the name of Barack Obama? Michael led faith outreach for President Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. And at a very young age, he served in the White House's faith-based initiative during President Obama's first term. Among other things, Michael now serves as the Chief Strategist for the AND campaign. And whether you're religious or not, I highly recommend his fantastic book, Reclaiming Hope. I've read it a couple times. Get it. It's going to help you so much. And we both grew up a few minutes from each other. He's from Buffalo, New York. I was born in Rochester, New York. So there's that fun and super important fact. Selfishly, I wanted Michael to give me hope for the future. That's why I had him on, and he delivered. I left our chat feeling more inspired and more hopeful than ever, and I hope our conversation will do the same for you. So let's jump right in, shall we? You can reach out to me anytime and for any reason at hello@letsgiveadamn.com. And here's my conversation with one of the youngest White House staffers in modern American history and lover of all things Italian, Michael Ware. Let's go. We have been, I don't know if homies or friends or what is the correct word for our relationship on social media, but I've been looking forward to this for quite some time. And I think it's maybe it's good that we didn't get together back then because I've got some like pent up, energy and questions. And I think your voice is one that is needed right now. Even more than, we could have talked 4 years ago in 2015, 2016, leading into the last election season, but this one feels so much. It feels heavier. It really does. There's some heavy things, and I'm not an anxious person as it is. Like I usually take everything pretty in stride, and I just feel myself having to take, more deep breaths these days, which is not a bad idea anyway. But yeah. I'm super thrilled to get to chat with you. Before we jump into the heavy stuff, the big stuff, let's get some story. Let's get some backstory because I know you. Folks might not know you on the podcast. Go back as far as you want to. Give us the who, what, when, where, and why of your story.
Gosh, so I'm from Buffalo, New York, and
did you know we have similarities there? I hate to interrupt you.
No.
So I was born in Rochester, New York.
Okay, great.
Right down the road. So we are neighbors, and we're within a few years of each other age wise. So we're probably there. When did you leave Buffalo?
2006.
Oh, you were there for a good chunk of your life, or half your life.
Yeah, basically. And if I would have known that you were from Rochester, I would have got my garbage plate out. We could have just had a Western New York feast.
I've been vegetarian for 6 years, so I don't know if the garbage plate would land too well
Yeah,
right now.
not sure.
I would feel like shit in all the ways if I did that now. But folks, garbage plate, if you don't know what we're talking about, people argue about whether it's Western New York or upstate New York, but it's in the western part of the state, so we'll call it Western. In Western New York, there's this thing called the garbage plate, and it was birthed, I guess, in Rochester by, as far as people can tell, there's a bunch of like fights, but it was Nick Tahoe who started it, and it's literally what it sounds like, a garbage plate. It is mac salad and home fries on the bottom, then your meat on top, whether that's 2 burgers, 2 cheeseburgers, 2 red hots, 2 white hots, and then you cover it with what are they, the hot sauce? What do they call that thing? I haven't been there in so long. The sauce on top. It's like,
Yeah,
it also has meat in it, and then you just put a ton of ketchup and hot sauce on it, and you just go to town.
Goodness. Yeah.
And I think I have the record still. Well, I mean, maybe not now, because the last one I had was probably 10, 12 years ago. But I downed an entire garbage plate in 3 minutes flat.
What an accomplishment, man. Yeah.
Accomplishment. And then I felt terrible later, obviously. I mean, it's like 3,000 calories in 3 minutes. That's
when you became a vegetarian. That was
it.
Yeah.
That put me over the edge. Okay. Anyway, keep going. Buffalo, New York. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's good. So grew up in Buffalo. It's where grew up in. I mean, it'll be familiar to you. Grew up in like a big Italian Catholic family, like many folks in the Rust Belt, and but wasn't, particularly, religious growing up, and even like a little, antagonistic in the way that like an adolescent could be. Became Christian when I was 15 after reading Romans, and that just sort of changed everything for me. I was already interested in politics, but thought initially, well, now I need to like go to seminary, become a pastor, just do like the most Christian thing, possible. But thankfully I had a pastor in my life who said, Michael, look around, there are Christians who aren't pastors. And I said, oh, that's a good observation. And so I went to DC and went to George Washington University, and sort of the question that's guided my vocation has been, what does it look like? What does it mean to be faithful in public things? I should say that my wife is from Buffalo. We went to middle school and high school together, and so we have a 21-month-old daughter now, and we got married in 2011 after we'd been in DC together for a while. So I went to GW. Long story shorter. My sophomore year at college, I met in the lobby of a hotel a young senator by the name of Barack Obama, and he would announce a few days after we met that he was running for president. I'd followed his career, and the way that he spoke to faith in particular was meaningful to me. I told him I wanted to work for him, and 10 months later, I was in Iowa during the presidential campaign. And so that set off, an incredible, unexpected, chain reaction that brought me to the White House, where I served in the faith-based office for 3.5 years, and then was asked to run religious outreach for his reelection campaign. And so did that, and did the second inaugural. I ran religious affairs for his second inauguration. And then I've been consulting and writing. I wrote a book, Reclaiming Hope, in 2017. Have a new book out called Compassion and Conviction that just came out last month, that I co-authored with my friends Justin Giboney and Chris Butler. It's a book that reflects the AND campaign, and I've been, speaking at the intersection of faith and politics and culture for a long time. So that's kind of where I am. I'm still based in DC, in Northern Virginia.
Nice. Okay, so we have so much to unpack there. Before we get into kind of the heavy stuff, I'm glad you went as far as meeting President Obama in. At the time, Senator Obama, in that lobby, and that led to, really, I should point out that I think, what are you, 32 years old right now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've already, I mean, you've already lived, an entire lifetime by the time you're 32. I mean, because this was how many years ago? What age were you when you met President Obama in that, then Senator Obama in that lobby?
19.
19. Yeah, and that was my calculation as well.
Yeah.
And so, there were some people, Obama included, that took some leaps of faith on you. They obviously saw something in
Yeah.
you, but they
Yeah.
saw this young kid that was like, "Hey, I want to work for you." And probably many people listening have done that to someone, at some point, and they've been like, "No, that's not going to happen." And a president, a then president or would be president took that leap on you. So before we get into all that, because I've got so much to unpack there, I do want to bring up one more thing about your story. Is if anybody follows you for any length of time on your social media, you cannot stop. There's a few things you cannot stop talking about. Well, one is that you're Italian,
Yeah. This is true.
right?
This is true.
And
Yeah.
so I wanted to point out that not only did we live an hour from each other growing up, but I am also half Italian. My
Yeah.
family comes from the Campobasso area in Italy, and so my mom's maiden name is Managros. That was the English version of Managrasso, which means big hands or fat hands, which is
Yeah.
where our name. And oddly enough, most of us have humongous hands. Like I have humongous piano finger hands. That it's so funny that with the last name Big Hands,
Yeah.
some of us actually have some really huge hands. Like
Yeah.
I'm a small Latino Italian that can palm a basketball. But what before we get into bigger stuff, what you love being Italian? What is it about your culture and how far back? I mean, is it which of your relatives came over here? Is it more recent or is it a long time ago? Give me some of that history, because I love when people get excited about where they're from. I love when people figure that out and really embrace it, and it's something I think that is important for us. So just from your perspective, how did that sort of evolve?
Yeah, I mean, so and actually, this is probably a deeper sort of subject than maybe you were anticipating. It's just been really important for me. So it's given me a sense of sort of rootedness and connectivity that I didn't always feel growing up. Uh, I'm adopted, so my adopted family is Italian, but and that goes back. So it was my great grandparents that came over, so not too recent. But my great grandparents, spoke broken English their entire life. My grandparents spoke Italian, and then, by the time you get to my parents, it's pretty Americana.
Yeah, sketchy. Yeah,
pretty,
right.
pretty. And so I'm, it's just been really meaningful. Growing up, I never thought, my grandfather was finally able to go to Italy. I think for his 50th anniversary, or it was a major accomplishment for my grandfather to get to go to Italy. And that's what I always thought, man, maybe one day I'll get to go. And things have just worked out where, in part because I have a wife who's gracious in this way, where we've been able to spend a decent amount of time in Italy over the last 5-6 years. And so I've just come to love it being there. And so, yeah, it's that combination of sort of rootedness to family history. The culture is just beautiful. Obviously, love the food, love the art. I think the Italian community in America is a really beautiful thing. And then just, being there. And so I spend most of my time in northern Italy, even though my family's from the south. So we love Bologna. Bologna is our and so, yeah, it's just a beautiful thing, and would recommend, one of my favorite things to do is when, I tell people my DMs are always open. If you need Italy recommendations or anything like that, it's a great source of joy. The last thing I'd say is, I'm a big fan of Bologna's football team. So I've gotten
nice.
So we've been able to go to a few games, and actually took my daughter to her first game last year, which was a blast.
Amazing. I mean, I think, especially, I don't think I knew that you were adopted, especially for that, it's so important. One of my frustrations about living in America for half my life, first half, or kind of the 10 years, when I was a kid, we moved to Guatemala for 10 years. That's where my dad is from. So I'm half Italian. Then my dad's a Guatemalan immigrant. He came from Guatemala when he was young. And one thing that's been so frustrating about living in America these last like decade and a half is so many people, and we'll get to American exceptionalism or this idea that they're trying to pitch to us that America is so great and so amazing and flawless. And you get so into that, you buy into that lie so much that you forget where you've come from and how important that is, right? I had two really special guests on over the last few weeks. One was Mark Charles, independent presidential candidate, and then one was a friend of his, a mutual friend of all three of ours, which was Charles Robinson, who's
Yeah.
another Native American. You know Charles
Yeah,
Robinson?
yeah, I know Charles.
Yeah.
well.
I smoke Charles's cigars all the time. We were smoking back when we were
Yes,
kids
so
a
am
few weeks
I.
ago. Yes. Oh man, I love. I didn't know that connection. That's amazing. But you know, I talked with both of them about the importance of naming things and knowing where you come from. All of that is so important because it gives you this groundedness. One of my big frustrations in life is being born in New York, growing up in Guatemala, spending 6 years traveling the world, and then since getting married, 4 years in Minneapolis, 4 years in Tacoma, Washington, now 4 years in Nashville, and we're leaving again on this continuous search to find home. I just have you seen Home on Apple TV? This show on Apple TV.
I
Have you seen it?
haven't. No.
So it's about all these wonderful like homes, but it's not it's not like an HGTV home show.
Yeah.
I mean, they go deep into the stories, and these are very incredible homes. And I just watched an episode with this guy named Theaster in Chicago, and he is in the South Side of Chicago, where people, where all the violence is, and where people from outside Chicago think, oh, don't go there, you'll get shot up, and there's all this and there's all that, and they have this perception of South Side of Chicago. And that's been his home. And so he's bought all these buildings and converted them into he bought an old bank and he bought an old this and converted them and just these really beautiful spaces. He's been able to do that because he has home and he's stayed,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
And my wife and I talk about this all the time. Like, we've got to find home. Like, we
Yeah.
want to find home so that we can, like, even with only being in places for 3 or 4 years at a time, we've been able to do really well with our neighbor. Like, I could take you to all my neighbors right now and they all know us and we have supper together and things like that. But it's still, there's always this thing in the back of our heads like, oh, we're not staying here. Like,
Right.
this was short term. We moved here for a purpose and now we've got to move on. And so it's just an important conversation about, I love that you're so.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And then, I just affirm your, growing up, the idea, I've been really struck. My experience growing up in a place like Buffalo was, and there are some unhealthy aspects to this, but sort of a white identity was not, we never spoke about being white. We were Italian. There was a specificity to it. And, that comes with all kinds of like, well, the Italians are different than the Irish or different than the Polish. And, there's all those kind of like old school, like feuds and that kind of thing. And so some of that's not healthy. I have been struck by being in the Rust Belt in the last 4 or 5 years to see people I've known my entire life identify as white. And, they know my political standing and things like that. And I remember being at a wedding in 2015, 2016. Someone I've known my entire life came up to me and started a conversation. It became clear, that they were asking questions that sort of intimated that, that like whites need to stick together. And why are you, and that just did not, it was not a part of like the culture growing up. It is a part of the season that we're in now, not to go to big issues really fast, but it's part of what Trump has, I think, empowered and what he's sort of given voice to. And it's not a healthy thing. So I really agree. And I've talked to, I know, Lisa Sharon Harper, and this idea that, that folks knowing their history and having a sense of rootedness where it's possible, in a tradition that's real, not in a constructed sort of political category like white, is something that I just think it's important.
Yeah, super important. I totally agree. So one of the reasons, Michael, that I wanted to have you on, again, I just wanted to like actually face-to-face meet and let's chat and let's start this amazing friendship that's forthcoming. I'm sure of it. But One of the big things I wanted you to come on and talk about was, I think you have a very measured, mature, like, way of talking about politics in general. Not just, I know your angle is politics, faith, and culture, right? You kind of, that's your
Yeah,
intersection.
yeah,
But I think the way you talk about politics and the way you walk through these kind of big issues, not kind of, very big issues, applies to anyone, whether they have a faith leaning or not, or whether it's your faith leaning or not. I mean, it's
yeah,
all, you kind of present things in a way that you can't really, in my, most of the time you presented stuff, I'm sure we have, a fairly long list of things that we might not agree on. Maybe not, maybe a little list, but we have a list. But I always want to engage with you about those things because of the way that you present them. And so we are coming up on, over the next few weeks, I'm going to have a few different people from different angles come on and talk about, 75% of the listeners are here in the US, 25% are in like 50 or 60 other countries, but most of them are here.
yeah.
And we have pretty big stuff coming up right now. And so right before the election, Kirsten Powers is going to be on, and a few others in between there. And so let's dive right in
Yeah, let's do it.
on all things politics right now, because one of the things that I want to get your kind of quick take on is, you, in your newsletter that is hosted on Substack, which I really enjoy. Thank you. You've been following and kind of giving updates each and every day, through the DNC and now the RNC. What are some of the biggest, let's start high level and then we'll get into nitty gritty. Like, what are some of the high level, things that the differences you've noticed, tones, focus, just like, and I'm not looking for anything in particular. If there are things about the RNC that you're like super jazzed about, or like really impressed by or surprised by, like,
Yeah.
give it to me. But just tone, focus, like, what are the main differences you're seeing between these two pretty important events that are, I think, in some ways unifying some people and in some ways further polarizing people? Some pretty wild stuff we've seen, little clips
Yeah.
and longer speeches and stuff over the last few days.
Yeah, I mean, so right. I think one of the main takeaways I've had is, you know, our politics is increasingly driven by a relatively small set of actors and interests and folks who are sort of hyper engaged. Um, and the conventions, the Democratic convention more than the Republican, but this applies to both. It has seemed to me that the conventions reflect sort of a vision of the political party that is appealing in the way that sort of the party leaders know it should be,
Yeah.
appealing to a wider set of Americans than what the actual day-to-day operations of these politicians and the political parties actually look like. And so, I think the Democratic convention in particular was really, healthy. I mean, the criticism of it would be, it was more narrative driven. They did not, there were not long sort of policy discourses. But, if I'm a Fox News watching Republican and I'm watching the Democratic convention, I'm thinking this is not what I've been told, the Democratic Party is. And to a certain extent, the Republican convention has been very much about trying to convey the idea that what you've been told about Donald Trump is not true. Like, what you've been told about the Republican Party is not the real Republican Party. Now, some of that's been through propaganda. I believe on Tuesday, they had a naturalization ceremony in the White House. This is on behalf of a president who's been advanced xenophobic rhetoric and policy by any reasonable estimation. It's not being too partisan to say that they've been lifting up all kinds of. They had a slate of sort of female Trump administration staffers last night talk about how great Trump is to women and how he's lifting them up. So, like, some of it's propaganda, but that would be one of my main takeaways. These conventions are one of the few opportunities in our politics right now where the parties feel like they're communicating to the nation, not just to siloed out sort of echo chambers. And that's been reflected. And it should lead us to think about every other day. And whether we
Sure.
prefer a political party that's casting a broader net, or whether we like and reward politicians who speak in a narrow kind of way. I thought just a couple more comments on the Democratic convention. It was remarkably faith forward, obviously, especially on that last night. I mean, we had 40 straight minutes really of really faith-centric programming. I think a big part of that was preempting what they knew would be coming this week from the Republicans. I also think it's genuine to Biden and his vision, not just of his own personal faith, but of the role faith plays in the country. And then I just thought the keynote speakers were just wonderful for the convention. I thought First Lady Michelle Obama, in 2012, she gave a speech that sort of blew people away. In 2016, it felt like she carried that night, and you thought, gosh, how is she going to do it again? She did it again. I thought, obviously, my former boss, President Obama, was incredible and gave it was vintage Obama. There have been a lot of comments that, like he's, he's changed from hope to fear, and it's like, no, if you read that speech and read his 2004 speech or the 2008 speech he gave in Philadelphia on race, there is a clear through line. Everything from his admiration for the framework of the Constitution, which he talked about in his 2020 convention speech, to the way that he approached race, to the way that he approached, he's just doggedly insistent on trying to persuade Americans who disagree with him. And the perseverance it takes to, serve as president for 8 years, be in the public eye for now, a couple decades, and still be like, I'm gonna treat fellow Americans with good faith is just really admirable to me.
Yeah, he's really damn good at that too. Even my, to bring it, home for a second, even my parents who, despite my dad, coming here as an illegal immigrant and becoming naturalized and growing up here in that sort of environment, he's been pretty in with President Trump, for a variety of reasons, and we've gone around and around on that. But even with how he feels things should be going and who he wants to become president, who did become president, who wants to become president again, he can't say a bad thing about President Obama. He can't. Even this guy even my dad, who wants President Trump to become the next president, is like, I can't. Like, I respect the dude. Like, you can't, because he and Michelle both have maintained such maturity and clarity, and they've kept their eye on the prize, which is truly, that doesn't mean that they're not going to speak out on injustices or speak out when evil things happen, but their eye on the prize is truly unifying Americans, the most amount of Americans possible, right? Because you're not going to get everybody
in this kind of environment. I agree.
And we're currently seeing the exact opposite, that where it's, our current president wants to draw very clear lines in the sand, and he wants to separate people. He wants to put, in two different camps, a clear fence in between. There doesn't seem to be a desire to really unify anybody on anything. It's if you're for these things, you're over here. If you're for those things, you're over there. And it's not just him. It's I used to think that we'd be better off with a President Pence. Maybe he'll get impeached and he'll be out, and it'll be President Pence. At least he's quieter, at least. And I'm like, holy shit, just last night you took Hebrews 12 and you took out Jesus and you put in Land of Heroes and Old Glory. Yeah. Like, incredibly blasphemous. Yeah. Like, you just don't do that. And so now I'm like, ooh, I can't believe I ever even thought that. He's kind of like gained more boldness over the years or whatever. It's been weird.
It's there have been some aspects, I thought Karen Pence gave a good speech last night that was befitting of her office, focusing on military and military families and veterans. I do think that Republicans, that they've hit on some points that deserve, response, that don't, that everything shouldn't be sort of swept away. Like we just have to acknowledge in our politics that there are sincere disagreements on both sides, even if the sincerity of those disagreements gets manipulated and exacerbated and sort of changed by politicians pursuing their own interests. It's really important to dig beneath sort of that manipulation that Trump is so good at, to what he's tapping into that's real and deserves an honest response. That's what I appreciated so much about, not to go, but First Lady Michelle Obama and President Obama, who both acknowledged in their remarks really like a shock. I've never heard it in political rhetoric in this, at this sort of level before, which is like, I know that they both said, like, I know that we're in an environment where you may not be able to hear me right now. That things are so polarized where you just, but I'm going to try anyways. And I'm coming to you with as much integrity and honesty as I can. And I hope that you'll like let down your guard enough to like process what I'm saying, and like, don't accept it wholesale without some like critical thinking. But this is from my heart. Like, it was very moving and also kind of disturbing at the same time, that you have people like begging to be to be heard, to get beyond sort of the defense mechanisms that people have. So yeah, I mean, I'm expecting, we're recording this on Thursday. I'm expecting, if the election was held today, Joe Biden would win. The Trump campaign knows that. And I expect Trump's speech tonight to be visceral and strident. And I think he's going to throw everything at Joe Biden that he can, because they know that they're not going to be able to raise Trump's favorability ratings. If you don't like Trump, there's not much he's going to be able to say that's going to like change your opinion. So they need to drag Biden down, and I think that's the approach they're going to take.
Yeah, it almost seemed, I agree with you, and I was just talking with a buddy this morning, like, I agree that I think if the election were held today, Joe Biden would win for a variety of reasons. I think, America is exhausted.
Yes.
Like, we are exhausted. I've never felt this exhausted in my life, just on an emotional, spiritual, mental, like, it just, the office of the presidency shouldn't occupy our minds morning, noon, and night every single day. That's never happened. Like, yes, obviously in the last 8-10 years, I've gotten more into politics than ever. I truly loved, President Obama for so many reasons, but I never felt that way. I would, I followed him on Twitter and other things, and he tweeted like once every week, like, right? Like, there's only a few hundred tweets throughout his presidency, and that happens sometimes in a day's time with President Trump. And so you've got just like so much, and I hope you're right. I hope you're right that we can continue to, carry this through, that Americans will hopefully, as a whole, see. I'm sure there are valid, maybe not directly tied to President Trump, but I'm sure there are valid things that this presidency is doing. I'm sure there are.
Yeah.
But it can't be worth. Those things can't be worth what we're experiencing. Like the fruit of what's happening is truly like hurting us as a whole. Not even to mention that we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? Which has gone every which way, and that's taken a toll. And we literally have, Laura Trump saying, talking about women's, like the 4 million jobs that have come on the scene for women since the presidency, and she doesn't care to mention that 3 million of those have gone away since the pandemic started. Like, just crazy things like that. Let's talk about how you personally, obviously how you deal with this personally comes out in your work, but how do you personally navigate who you look to and trust politically? Because correct me if I'm wrong, would you count yourself, where are you on the political spectrum? I mean, in terms of, because I feel like there's, again, maybe this is what I'm attracted to about you, is that there's some things that feel very conservative, and there's some things that feel, like very right, very left, and everything in between. So where do you see yourself on the political spectrum? And then how do you As a father, as a husband, as a American citizen with Italian heritage, as a Christian, as someone who represents people in the faith world, both for work and for pleasure and play for you. Like, how do you navigate those things? Because I know there's people that are listening right now that are precisely where you are and where I am. I think I'm probably more left than you are on a few things, but I still wrestle with these things. I always am aiming for who gives a shit where I land on this, like on the spectrum politically. I want to do the right thing here.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of people there. So explain kind of your process.
Yeah. I mean, so I have a lifelong commitment to civil rights and poverty efforts. And so that has landed me with the Democratic Party. And again, like part of that is just family background. My grandfather was a union guy. And so like, that sort of FDR labor, strain is pretty significant with me. That said, you're right. I mean, there are issues where I'm very, far left on the spectrum, and there are issues where I fall more on the conservative side. I think a few things have helped ground me. One is, we increasingly treat political parties as our masters and not as vehicles for mediating our views. And political parties were never meant to be masters. And the reason for that is because, they change all the time. The Democratic Party's position on trade right now is not what it was 16, 20 years ago. Their position on immigration was not. And so if your primary identity is I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican and that's just what I do, you're going to be a disintegrated person because you're going to be following not any sort of consistent line of intellectual like thought or outlook, but you're going to be following like a very complicated political process of how these parties hold together. And so even as I've been a Democratic operative, even as I've worked for Democratic candidates, having that separation and remind myself of who I am, where I get my values from, and bringing those to politics as opposed to letting politics dictate for me what I think, what I believe, what I think is right has been really critical. I'd say that the second piece is, a sense of history, a sense of, the history of public policy in America is a history of unintended consequences and even, counterproductive action. And so I think public policy is really important. I think elections are really important. But I also believe we should come to politics with a tinge of ambivalence that's informed by the fact that even though, we have to act now, we can't be quietists. We can't be paralyzed by the idea that we may be wrong. Like we have a charge as citizens to act and lead now. What we also can't do is sort of pretend as if we have it all figured out and that sort of it's by any means necessary. We need to, our political priorities need to be enacted now in order to sort of have a perfect society. Like we just ought to be aware of the fact that other people have thought that way and have been embarrassed and shamed and have had to apologize. And we don't want to be in the same place where we sort of use, to use kind of Christian language, where we use unfaithful means to reach political ends. Politics, as important as it is, isn't worth that. It isn't ultimate. And so, those two things have really, really guided me. And I think it's, look, and you've heard me say this before, but politics is causing spiritual harm in this country.
Yep.
And it's because politics and politicians are claiming space that they don't deserve. I mean, this is what you're talking about when you're talking about Trump being in our living rooms every night. It's like psychological oppression. It's good for them. I mean, the more they're in our heads, the more we're motivated to give them money, the more that they're able to sort of control and dictate how conversations play out. But it's not healthy, and it's not the way our politics has to be. And at the end of the day, the citizens, the citizenry, either incentivize or disincentivize that kind of approach. And we need to be a lot more thoughtful as citizens about sort of rejecting politicians, whether they agree with us or not, from sort of encroaching on public life to the extent, and our personal lives to the extent that they have been.
If someone just heard you say those words right now about, politics were never intended to be masters, right? Maybe someone is acknowledging, okay, that's how I see it right now. That's how it is for me, and I don't want it to be that way. I want to think more nuanced. I want to think more holistic when I think about politics and who I attach myself to and where I put money and time and energy, right? What are a couple things, like a couple tangible things that people can do to sort of begin to detach from a political view or a political party or a politician as a master, right? Like they are the end all be all. They are the one hope, the kind of radicalized cultish things that we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
And look at it in a more nuanced, balanced, holistic way, in the ways that you just described. What are some tangible things they can do right now?
Yeah, a few things. So just on media consumption, if you keep track of what you're reading in terms of news for a week or two, and if you find that the overwhelming majority of the content that you're processing and that you're consuming affirms what you already believe, then that's a good sign that you're not helping yourself out and you're not helping out sort of our civic life. Our disagreements in politics are disagreements for a reason. I read things and this is my profession. I read things all the time that go, oh gosh, maybe I'm wrong on this,
Right.
Gosh, I've never thought about it that way before. And so, make sure to, and again, this is not to put a burden on people. We all have time for different things. Not everybody has to be a political scientist or sort of read 8 newspapers a day, but for the time that you're allotting, given your season of life, try to read as broadly as you can. Try to read things that challenge you. Try not to, given that we all have limited time, stay away from the trite and the sort of smug, and try to read things that are more earnest, that are more informed, that are not just about riling up your emotions, but actually, feeding your mind. So that would be sort of on the media consumption piece. And then in terms of what you put out, a similar suggestion, look at your Facebook feed, wall, or your Twitter feed. And if, 20 of your last 20 tweets are about affirming your side or bashing the other side, then it reveals something about this is not a team sport. If you're going to support a candidate, you should be really clear in your mind about where you disagree with that candidate, and anticipate down the road where you're going to disagree with them. I mean, this was an issue with President Obama. I mean, there were things that he did that he said he was going to do, and people acted like, oh gosh, how could this happen? I could never foresee it. Well, it's because you were only hearing what you wanted to hear, and weren't actually looking critically and saying, oh gosh, if I'm going to vote for him, but if he gets elected, I'm going to have to think about, maybe there are some things I could do to make sure that that he understands, and that sort of political powers understand, I'm not with you on this. And the same goes for Trump. I mean, I think one of the most frustrating things for folks when they think about especially religious support for Trump is I think they kind of get some of the even if they disagree, they get like the logical sort of reasons why you support Trump. I think what really upsets people is the fact that so many religious people are being quiet about everything else. Like they've made some sort of blood pact where just because they voted for the guy, they can't criticize him on like just obviously, unacceptable actions and things that he does. And that sort of sycophancy is I mean, it's not consistent with being a Christian. It's not consistent with being a citizen. Like you're not doing your civic duty if you're giving politicians a kind of pass because you view them again as sort of like mascots and not public servants.
Yeah, I mean, any healthy relationship has that give and take, that push and pull, right? Like, I mean, you're married, I'm married. Like, my relationship is what it is, 12 years in being married, because it's not a yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir relationship. If I do something or say something or act a certain way that is not appropriate, that does not come across well, my wife will let me know. My kids will let me know. Like, I grew up in a pretty abusive home where there was no kid talking to parent about anything. It was only receiving, and the receiving for so much of it was not, it was all different kinds of abuse. In my home, my kids can talk to me. Now, we have to work through that, right?
Yeah.
But my kids feel comfortable telling me when they think that I'm wrong. And it might come out wrong on their end, but that's a good relationship there. I have treated my children at 5, 7, and 8. I've treated them in such a way, we have treated them in such a way that even at that young age, they can, most of the time respectfully, sometimes disrespectfully, talk back and tell me, I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
I never would have been able to do that when I was younger. Why? Unhealthy relationship, unhealthy dynamic.
Yeah,
and
right.
I totally see that. And I think I was gonna interrupt you a few seconds ago and be like, why you gotta call me out like that? Because sometimes my timeline it's not, I will criticize. One thing that I'm really good at is criticizing. I just have it's not even I don't know if it's a critical spirit on my part. I just get very upset both when the people that I run with are acting horribly or are doing or pushing for things or supporting things that they shouldn't. But I'm also, I'm just equally as hard on the other side. And it sometimes comes across as like, oh, Nick's always pissed off at everything. And I don't feel that way in my own life, but it comes across that way. And so I think those are some really good points. And I would add one thing. I know I asked you something, but I would add one thing for those listening is, don't just think about, for so many people, they spent so long not getting involved in politics. And now, because the national level politics are so loud, that's where they're involved only. They're not giving enough time. They're not learning well. They're not researching well. And they're just, by learning how to be political at a national level, they are simply like just on Twitter and on Facebook and things like that. That's not what it's all about. But also go like super local.
Yeah.
Like you can't, if you're only following, what's happening in Congress or what's happening on the Hill or what's happening in the Oval Office, but you don't know who your council members are. You don't know who your mayor is. You've not tried to get a meeting with your mayor at some point. Like that's the wrong way, because the people that are serving at your local level, assuming they're in it for the long haul, they're going to be in those national positions someday. And if you didn't know them here, like you want to follow them along their journey and really get to know them as they, get into public life. And so I see so many people that are so interested in what's happening, at a national level, and they have no interest doing it at a local level. They've never voted, they'll go and skip through all the pages, at the ballot box to get to the big ones. And it's like, you need to know who the new sheriff's going to be, or the judge is going to be, or who's going to be overseeing schools, who's going to be the treasury of the council. Like those are important roles. Yeah. And so I'm trying to encourage people as well to like get involved at a super local level.
No, that's so important. Yeah.
Yeah. Super important. Michael, how do we get here? And here's what I mean by that. Like growing up in a very conservative Christian environment. It's funny now looking back, a lot of conservative Christians talk about the left, and their obsession with cancel culture, right? But we did that. Like conservative Christians, I think maybe created cancel culture. I mean, I can't tell you how many, we had entire sermon series on the evils of Harry Potter and the evils of Cabbage Patch Kids, and don't watch this and don't partake of that and don't wear name brand clothing. And maybe you should think twice about having a Christmas tree. That's a pagan symbol. And I mean, we canceled everything except just a few things, right? And so I sort of get it now that I see it playing out, to the tune of 80% of white evangelicals supporting Trump. But at the same time, I don't understand. So how did we get here I was not a huge fan of President Bush. I was not a fan of most Republican parties that I've been alive for, Republican presidents that I've been alive for. But I could see, I think Bush is pretty likable. Like, I'd have a beer with that guy. I'd go play golf with that guy. Like, okay, he's very likable. Now we have this president that, has a scandal-ridden life. From as far back as there are records, he's been doing things wrong and poorly, hurting people, hurting women, hurting minorities. And then he brought that into the presidency. We're now seeing it with a whole lot more power behind it. How are 80% of people that claim to follow Jesus, who loved minorities, who loved marginalized peoples, who loved women, who loved children, and really who summed up the whole entire thing, all of life, and love God and love your neighbor. That's it. Like, do those things and you're on the right track. They claim to follow that and they support this guy. How did we get here? Small question, super small question.
There's so much. I think a vapid and inadequate sort of political theology, just how, in many ways, evangelicals have bought into the same kind of relativism and the same idea that really actually faith isn't up to the task of informing our politics. Like, that politics is like this area of life that's sort of cordoned off from God. And you've heard that over the last 5 years in particular, this idea that, in order for us to be Christian in our personal lives, we need to have, a bully in the White House. We need to make some moral compromises in politics because it's dirty anyway. So I think there's that. I do think that, conservative evangelicalism is having and is had to have a reckoning with the safe harbors that have been present for racism and misogyny and xenophobia. So I think those are real things that are real currents. And then, Nick, as you know, I'm someone who believes that Donald Trump should not have won in 2016, and that 2016 was not all about James Comey and, voter manipulation. 2016 was, to a certain extent, to a really critical extent, and especially, I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to be critical of my own side. And, they thought that they could get away with ignoring broad swaths of the American public. Like, they had an approach to politics that said, in 2016, all we have to do is turn out our people and we'll win, because Donald Trump is such a toxic and sort of limited political figure. And that was the wrong approach. It was the wrong approach politically. Obviously, they lost. It's the wrong approach for intending to govern and lead a country. There are sincere claims among religious conservatives that need to be dealt with. I'm not saying that they need to be agreed with 100%.
Sure.
But they need to be spoken to. And in 2016, there was just a cold shoulder. It's part of why I wrote, I wrote Reclaiming Hope for the dual purpose of, I wanted to help religious conservatives understand that Barack Obama and Democrats weren't waking up every morning thinking, how do I hurt the church today? That what they'd been told about the way these folks think about religion is misguided and not complete. I also wanted to help Democrats understand that you couldn't just sweep all religious conservative criticism under the rug of like racism or sort of just uh, insincere, sort of indoctrinated, whatever, brainwashed, whatever. That no, like there's actually something here, and one way you can know that there's something there is because they're criticizing you for positions that you didn't have 10 years ago. Like it's not like the Democratic Party's been stagnant for the last 40 years and it's only evangelicals that have changed. Like Democrats have changed too. Like, so there's going to be some conflict. So there's a lot that's been happening. It's not the kind of thing that's going to be, and this is really important. If Joe Biden wins this election, it doesn't mean that like we've turned the page to a new America.
Exactly.
It doesn't mean that you can, as a civic matter or a political matter, ignore the fact that millions and millions and millions of people are going to vote for Donald Trump in 2020. And they need to have a place in this country. We need to be really clear about what we reject and what sort of sentiments we say we don't want to be embraced in public life. But the people are there. And so anyone suggesting that they're going to lead the country has to lead the whole country. It's part of why I've been, encouraged by what Joe Biden has been saying. He seems to understand that. He seems to be committed to that idea that, yes, we're going to have real disagreements, but I'm, he said in his convention speech, he said, I'm glad to accept the nomination of the Democratic Party, but I'm going to be an American president. I'm going to be a president who views my constituency not just as the activists and the party members who support me, but as the whole country. And that's just something we've been missing. It's certainly not Trump's approach. Donald Trump has not acted or talked as if he represents all Americans. And we've seen the cultural and political fallout of that.
God, we need a president that is for the most amount of Americans possible. Like right. we need that. We desperately need it. And you brought up a good point. One of the things that is still not, I guess, scares me is the wrong approach. But I'm worried. I'm worried about November 3, if and when Barack Obama. Joe Biden. Because oh God, I wish Barack Obama could run for a third term, or at least Michelle. Come on, Michelle. But if Joe Biden gets elected, Donald Trump has already done a hell of a job convincing people that it's going to be rigged, right? He said it over and over and over again, that if we don't win, it's because it's rigged, and millions of Americans will buy that horse shit. So my problem is, in the same way that Democrats said, we're going to leave the country if Trump becomes president, and nobody left, or,
right.
a few people left, right? Yeah. People are saying we're going to take up arms if Joe Biden becomes president. Like, that's not going to happen, but it could. It could. I mean, we saw President Trump bring that St. Louis couple to the RNC. They gave their speech. Everybody knows what story that's attached to. They came out brandishing weapons against BLM supporters, right, walking through the neighborhood. And then, is it coincidence that 2 days later, Kyle Rittenhouse crosses state lines with an AR-15 and murders two protesters? No, they're listening. They are taking cues from the top. And so I'm worried. Maybe it is scared. Maybe scared is the right approach. Is like, cool, November 3, Joe Biden gets elected. It's not over, because he's already convinced, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Americans. That's enough to start trouble. That if this happens, it's because it was done in a dirty way, which is not. It's not the case. We've already seen that voter fraud is virtually not a thing. It can't happen in the way that he's convinced millions of Americans that it can happen, but they're eating it. They're right. Taking it hook, line, and sinker. And so it's going to be an interesting, again, best case scenario, Joe Biden gets elected, but it's not going to be a pretty couple weeks after that, or couple months. I don't know. It's gonna be wild. What do you think's gonna happen? What's your sort of prediction for those few days around that time?
I mean, I am hoping it's a blowout. For this very reason. I think,
if it's close, right, it'll be easier for him to cry wolf if it's like in the margin. Right. But if it's a blowout, there's no way.
Yeah, and so I don't think that this is an election where you want to aim for 50 plus 1, 270 electoral votes. I think this is an election where you need to go big for that reason, and also just the Republican Party has to be better. Like it's not the Republican Party has not always been this bad. And so,
Yes.
but what it needs is really what the Democratic Party needed in 2004. Like they need to get creamed. They need to lose an election that they really want to win and be forced to reckon with how they need to change. And so, I don't mean to. If the election was held today, Biden would win. Yeah. I am also cognizant of the fact that Donald Trump is going to be fully exerting himself in his convention speech tonight. And we have a campaign where, billions of dollars are going to be spent to influence the outcome. And so sort of making predictions for what's going to happen in November is just a very tentative thing. I mean, I think Biden's going to win, but, we're going to have 3 presidential debates. We're going to have the Biden campaign has been pushing back on Trump when Trump has sort of made faith attacks on Vice President Biden. The question I have is whether they persist there, and I think they should in a responsible way, or whether they feel like, we did pretty much everything that we could do at the convention. And we're now going to get out of that territory, which I think would be a mistake. So, man, we'll just have to see how the next 9 weeks plays out. I mean, as you mentioned, I track this very closely on my Substack at reclaiminghope.substack.com, and so on the Faith 2020 podcast. And so we help track for people how these things are developing. And it's presidential politics, man. Anything. It's
wild. It's wild. For a minute, talk about third-party candidates. Like for example, I like Mark Charles. I think in a perfect world, somebody like Mark. I mean, Mark is what everybody wanted, right? He doesn't have the political background, right? Everybody wanted not a politician, but the guy's got integrity and he has depth, and he wants to do really meaningful, substantial things for our country. But I mean, he has no support. And I love the guy, but he knows that he has no support. Mm-hmm. So like, there's a lot of people right now that are considering, there's things out there about Biden, right? People have to navigate these things and accusations and different things that have happened. Those are real things. We don't want to ignore those. Yeah. How should people be thinking, Christian and non-Christian alike? How should they be thinking about, what would you say to them to convince them to not vote third party, even though that might be an integrity-filled thing to do? Like, what's at stake here by not voting for Joe Biden? Or should they, if they really feel, in a heartfelt, sincere way about voting for somebody like Mark Charles or otherwise, should they go do that?
Yeah. So I'm not interested in sort of dictating to people how they vote. What I would say is the question you have to ask with your vote is not sort of, the question you have to ask with your vote is voting in this way the best stewardship of the limited influence I have for the best result for the country and for the community? With, in Christian theology, we talk about a preferential option for the poor, which basically means that, there should be an additional emphasis in your mind on those who are going to be hardest hit, who are most vulnerable when it comes to political and social decisions. And so look, like if you think that a vote for a third-party candidate is the most effective way to steward your vote possible, that let's say that Joe Biden lost by 1 vote in your state, and that sort of swung it, that you would feel like that in that outcome, your vote for that third party candidate was still the best decision you could make, then you should cast that vote. If you think, it's the same reason why I say, like, sitting out of an election, that's not possibly the best stewardship of the responsibility that you've been given. Though I don't mean to put like an individual burden on people. I just think generally that's the case. There may be individual circumstances where it's just going to be debilitating for you to make a decision. Generally, I think folks need to make a decision, understanding that your vote is not meant to be like a perfect expression of your will. No, your vote is a selection between options that have been selected by an entire community.
Yep.
And you're like, if you're a religious person, like God understands that. I often talk to Christians who act like they go into the voting booth, make a decision, and then get out and have to explain to God like what happened in there. Like he understands, all right. He gets that you didn't make all the decisions. The decision you do have is how do I cast my vote in a way that if I was the person determining the outcome on my own, it would be the best outcome in my discernment, in my sort of judgment for the country, for the community in which I live.
I love that. I love that. What is your prediction for, this is a ridiculous question kind of, but it's I think about it often. Like, what's your prediction for the future of America? And here's what I mean by that. Like, we always talk about America as an experiment, right? And you look at the Constitution, a Constitution that we still uphold and that even President Obama talks so like, with such big and high respect for it. And yet in it, there are 51 references to people, to a person in there, and they're all white landowning males, right? There's no reference to a woman in there. So women aren't represented in the Constitution. Native Americans are represented as savages, and Black people are 3/5 of a person, right? And so we have a Constitution that still, by and large, is seen through the lens of, if you're a white landowning male, this is for you, and it's kind of for everybody else, right? So there's these big, America's an experiment. Our Constitution's awesome, except that it's not. And, like, should we just sort of, if it is truly an experiment, should we say this failed, let's start again? Like, let's take some big sweeping steps to fix. Let's not take slow approaches. This is what I want to do. Like, I'm an Enneagram 8. I'm a disruptor. I'm an agitator. I'm more like a prophet. Like, I don't want to build things up. I destroy things and then let other people that are way more qualified than me build things up, right? And so I want to come in and just like topple it all down and say, guys, let's not waste our time on something that is already, look at systemic racism, look at our for-profit prison system, look at all the things that are wrong that we just seem to be like, well, that's bad, but meh, like we'll fix it at some point. And I personally am not okay with that. I'm like, no, let's just topple the whole thing down and start over, right? But I know it is possible, but it's not possible. So what do you sort of see? Like, what's the best case scenario? Joe Biden gets in, we've got these big problems. Like, how could we fix it as quickly as possible for the most people as possible?
Yeah, look, there's no silver bullet here. The outcome of the election in 2020 is important. It's not going to solve everything.
No,
I would say for all of its problems, the view Barack Obama had was the Constitution offers a framework that we've been wrong, both on the right and the left, to sort of view it as something with a sort of very definite meaning that we just have to argue over. The Constitution provides a framework and some clear guideline. No religious test. Obviously we have the Bill of Rights, but that's a framework in which the civic process can take place. And so I am, for instance, cautiously optimistic about the rise of civic engagement, particularly among young people. I am encouraged by the younger generation's commitment to justice, even if they don't always know what that looks like. They have the aspiration of justice, and like I don't think we. This is just going to be. We have to work through these issues together, and we need to, with focus and determination, and with a sense of appreciation for different opinions, and we need to act. We need to put the burden on legislators to legislate. We need to put the burden on citizens to not just complain, but to act and to serve. My hope is that this is a period of, where the ground is being tilled, where we are in this disruptive sort of time right now, but that, that a time to build, is going to come out of this. For me, Nick, at the base level of this, there are all kinds of structural reforms we need. I am very frustrated by any attempts to restrict voting. I think voting is as close to sacred as you can get with a civic act. And so, like, if you want people to trust in the civic process, having the right to vote be protected is like the baseline level of that. I think, there are problems with gerrymandering and with political representation. But at the base level of this, Nick, is the state of our politics reflects the state of our souls. It reflects the incentives and disincentives that citizens put into the system. I think that we're in a period right now where Americans are starting to reevaluate what they're incentivizing and disincentivizing in our politics. And if that changes, if the American people make a decision about what they're willing to accept and not accept in our politics, then we'll see change happen. And as slow and arduous as the process is, as the democratic process is, at the end of the day, it is accountable to the people. I think what frustrates a lot of people is, they feel they feel really strongly about what direction things need to go, but there are others who disagree, and that's democratic process. That's what we have to work on together.
I love it. Couple simpler, easier to answer and questions as we begin to wrap up. We'll do this again sometime. I could talk to you for forever, but a couple kind of simpler ones as we wrap up. One is kind of bring it full circle. What were some of your favorite parts about working with and for President Obama? I mean, a lot of people listening love the hell out of that guy, really respect him and the First Lady and what that administration brought about. So what were some of the favorite parts? You got kind of an inside scoop, which people need to read your book, Reclaiming Hope. It's got a lot of that in there. I love that book. I've read it a couple times. But yeah, so what were a couple of the things you loved working with and for him?
First of all, it was just like an incredible honor. I'd say that being in a position like that can really turn you inwards, can make you less intellectually curious, can sort of strip out the humanity of a person. And, I was there for the first term, so I wasn't there working in the White House for the second. But, I still remember notes in the margins of memos I wrote that he would leave that would just would be inspiring. I mean, would just be like,
Yeah.
No, this is someone who is not just sort of a political robot. This is not someone who's just operating off of sort of cold calculation. This is someone who is engaged in the civic process, who is asking good questions, who is earnest to a really remarkable degree for someone who achieved the office he had. And so that will always be inspiring to me. I mean, I mentioned earlier, as we were talking about his convention speech, and you've read the book. I have some criticisms of the man I love. I love President Obama. I have some criticisms of him. Overall, his determination to represent and speak to as many Americans as possible is something that we will hopefully not just have to I think it's something we'll admire in light of these 4 years. Hopefully it's not something that's only in the past. Hopefully we have that again in the future. We certainly don't have it now. And I think we're seeing how critical that is. And then, look, he was, he's just a very smart guy. I mean, he processed information like very few people I've been around in my life. And yeah, I mean, I could go on, but it was an incredible honor to work for him. And you know, I'm grateful for his continued leadership.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm a little jealous for sure. I mean, I admire the guy for so many reasons in so many ways, and I have a healthy amount of disagreements, and that's the world.
Yeah.
Michael, do you have any political aspirations? I know that you're like, you know, you have this role at the intersection of faith and politics and culture, but there's a lot more that could be done, and you obviously have, you know how this world works. Like, do you have any political aspirations or what?
Yeah, you know, I tend to believe that's the kind of thing that's brought to you and that you don't seek out. And so, and sort of what it would take to seek it out just doesn't seem like the best use of my time. So I'm going to continue to like serve where I am and find ways to be helpful and speak to what I think is important. And, you know, if the opportunity came and felt right and felt like it was the right move, yeah, I've been involved in politics my whole life, and public service is important to me. But I don't have designs, you know, on anything other than, you know, this idea of what does it mean to be faithful in public things, and wherever God leads me on that, you know, I'm good.
I love it. Michael Ware on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
And michaelware.com is your website.
Yeah.
Reclaiming Hope. And friends, I have read Reclaiming Hope a couple times. Go get the book. I have not read Compassion and Conviction. I'm sure it's good. I just haven't read it. So so I'll, based on what I know about you, get the book if you're interested in you know, things about faith and culture and things like that. Any other URLs or websites we should point people to as we wrap up here?
Just my website. I have a personal website.
They can get to everything from there, right? Like all of your
yeah, that's right.
Yep. Oh, they can subscribe to your newsletter from there. They can find your social media, all your writings, all endorsements, all that stuff. So michaelware.com. Michael Ware, thank you so much for joining us. This was super fun. We learned a ton, and just really grateful for who you are and your work.
Hey, man. Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it.
Well, friends, that's the show for today. A massive thanks to Michael Ware for joining us. Lots to learn from Michael's work and life. Visit letsgiveadamn.fm for more resources and more links and all that jazz. And thank you for listening. Seriously, I'm so honored. I'm so touched that you listen to these conversations week after week, that you show up week after week to support what we're doing and to learn and to grow. I created this show. Chad Snavely produced it. Let's Give a Damn is part of the Matter Media family. And again, you can reach out to me anytime for any reason. hello@letsgiveadamn.com. Sending love and peace to each one of you. Stay safe, keep giving a damn, and until next time, peace.